My name is Lauren Wozniak, and I am the Program Director at Willow House. I'm pleased to introduce to you our new series, Living with Grief in Uncertain Times, Help and Support for Families. This new series is facilitated by Willow House's senior trainers, Pamela and Andy McNeil. This will be a 5-part series released weekly online. At the 6th week of our series, we will have a live Q&A session with Andy, Pamela, and myself. Please bring any questions and thoughts that you might want to share. We're looking forward to supporting you virtually at this time.
Hi, this is Andy McNeil here with Pamela Gabay, and we welcome you back to our series of Living with Grief in Uncertain Times, Help and Support for Families. Our discussion topic for the next few minutes is navigating grief during COVID-19, how to help your children. In previous recordings, we discussed how grief impacts you as a family, as a whole. And then we also very specifically discussed how you can help, how you can take care of, how you can nurture yourself during difficult times. And in this, we really covered one of the first things when it comes to helping your children, and that's indeed taking care of yourself. There's a phrase that I picked up somewhere along the way, and I'm really not sure where, but there's a phrase that says that children are keen observers, but poor interpreters. And really by talking about that first thing of taking care of ourselves, we take care of ourselves because we really model healthy behaviors for our children. They are observing, and they're taking it in, and they're learning from us how we navigate very difficult situations in life and how we react to that. So that first step is very important. But it's really this second part of the phrase, children are keen observers, but poor interpreters. And that really takes us into our topic of discussion for this time. And that is that children are not only watching us, but they're interpreting that. And children aren't always the best interpreters of a situation. Because of this, one of the first things I wanted to talk about is the fact that your children need you. Children need caring, loving adults in their lives who will not only be a good role model, but will also engage with them and share openly with them. And someone who is approachable, they can ask questions, so they're not left on their own to often make just erroneous interpretations of an event that might have happened in their lives.
Andy, I would agree with you. So I'm Pamela Gabay, and I'm here with Andy as well. As children, one of the main ways they work through grief and they cope with all of the things that are going on around them and in their families, and cope with questions they might have, and really the whole idea of figuring out what's going on, that begins with play often. And parents and guardians often wonder why kids aren't talking to them about the person who died or the people who died, and why they're not talking with them about everything that's going on. Children don't often have the language, especially in the early days of grief. And they will turn to play because play is what they know. Play is where they're comfortable. Play can be an escape from everything going on with the family. And play can also be where they really process and begin to think about everything that's going on. But it's within the safety of play. And you mentioned, parents playing with their kids. When you're grieving and when your family is coping, getting down on the floor and playing blocks with your kids, playing a video game if that's what they like to play, shooting some hoops, getting some of that energy out. Really whatever they enjoy doing is the key here. not what you enjoy doing, but what they enjoy doing. And right, because we often think we're in the mood to do boobs, maybe, but they would like to play video games.
Right. Sometimes you have to dig deep, to do that. One of the things that I've thought about over the years, because I've talked to all sorts of parents, and I certainly say, you should play with your children and let them lead in that. And I understand. You come home, you've worked hard all day, you get home, your kids want your attention and they want to play. And you're just like, all I want to do is get in a reclined position somewhere and just, kick my feet up. So I would come home sometimes and my kids would come up and, Daddy, will you play with us? And I'd say, yeah, sure. And I would name 3 things that we could do, and it all allowed me to lay in an inclined position to do it. Right. But quite often when I do that, they would play with me for maybe, 3-4 minutes, and then they would go get bored and go on their way. But if I came home and they said, will you play with me? And I said, sure, I will. What would you like to do? And I just did what they wanted and I followed their lead. They would begin to tell me things about their day, their life. I would truly engage on a deeper level than when I tried to make it my terms.
Yeah, and there's something about play and being in the space that they want to be in that does open up the conversation, because you're leaning into what they're doing. And one of the things, with the Center for Grieving Kids that I ran for many years, I had kids, because we played with them, I had kids there who would say things like, well, I'm not used to adults playing with me. I'm not used to adults hanging out with me like this. And they would say it, and you could tell that they just really soaked up that interaction. They really soaked up the chance to, whatever it be regarding play, they appreciated that adults were engaging on that level with them. And I know so many parents who do get down on the floor and play Barbies, right? And they do play the different games that kids want them to play, but they especially need it when they're grieving.
Yeah.
And it might be hard for you as a parent because you're exhausted.
Oh, yeah.
You're really sad. You're trying to juggle so much, working and all of the responsibilities in your life. But one of the main things that you're thinking about as a parent is how can you really help your kids? And this is one of the main ways you can do it. And go ahead, Andy.
So it's something we have power over. I mean, that's part of the issue is when we've had a loss in our family, we really are stripped, at least sometimes feel as though we're stripped of all of our choices, all of our power over anything that we can do. And so many parents have come in over the years to sit down for counseling and say, I just don't know how to help my kids. And to know that one thing that you can do is to purposefully schedule some time and let them lead you in that play. It's a different way of playing and interacting with our kids. Rather than, how often do you sit down with your kids and you start asking them questions and their answers are, I don't know, fine. How was your day? Good. And there's no right. I'm okay. And you don't get the connection that you want. What we're talking about, we know works because not only have we used it in our own lives, but we've used it with other people's children when they would come to a support session or a counseling session, and just spending that time and giving that attention. For a child, if you think about this idea about them interpreting, that is positive energy that you're creating between you and your child. And that positive energy has a positive effect on them, not only how they interpret their relationship with you, but how they interpret themselves and their place in the world, and how they look at their own life and who they are. So it really is a valuable thing to spend time with your kids. Another thing, though, I wanted to talk about is kids are making interpretations, and sometimes their interpretations are even worse than the actual truth. And sometimes we as parents want to protect our children, and I get that. And so sometimes what we'll do in talking to them about the death is we try to find words that are maybe less harsh. And so we might use certain euphemisms, they've gone to sleep, or they've passed on, or language like that. And children are very concrete in their interpretations. And so I've had children, I know you probably have too, Pamela, where they had certain beliefs. I've had children who have trouble sleeping because they think, well, if you fall asleep and put you in a box, and these very stark interpretations. So what we encourage is being honest with children, thinking about the language that we use, that we do use words like death and die, and children have a hard time understanding those concepts, but we're kind of their first step in associating what has happened with the reality of death, and not other things in their lives.
Yeah, a good example of that is a 3-year-old who was told, "I'm sorry you lost your dad." Yeah. Immediately she thought, where do I go to find him? And she didn't voice that to anyone, but just continued looking out the window, waiting for him to come home because he was lost. And she actually didn't voice that until she was a little bit older, because at 3, you're much too young to really put that into words. But the word lost is something that we commonly use in our society. I'm sorry you lost your mom, your dad, your brother, or your sister. Kids of all ages will take that literally, and they'll wonder why they can't go find them. And they might even think that it's their job to go find them. Right. And that's why it is important to use actual terms and to explain what actual terms mean, even when kids are younger. Explaining that when somebody dies, their heart stops beating and they can no longer jump up and down and play. And you're not able to see them and hug them anymore because their body stopped working. And, we often struggle with how do you explain what this means to kids, but giving them direct information actually helps them a tremendous amount in their questioning and in their confusion. It also says that they can go to you and talk to you about anything when you're willing to have some early hard conversations with them.
Yeah, and in that you have had those difficult conversations, they will come back to you, certainly. But another piece is sometimes kids will just come back to you because they're processing it and they just need to hear it again. Yeah. So some people have even said to me, "Gosh, I did this, and now they keep asking me the same the same thing, and I keep answering it." And that sort of is also a maturity level, age type thing. Younger children often will come back and ask the same thing because they just need that reinforced. Or as they grow, they may come back and ask the same question they asked 3 years ago, but now they're at a different place in their development, and they can hear it in a different way, and they can absorb it in a different way. And so they may interpret those things. But there's another piece to being honest we want to talk about as well is often as parents, particularly when the death is traumatic, maybe a homicide or a suicide, it's tempting as a parent because we want to protect our kids. I can't tell you how many parents I've talked with who have said they're just too young to have to go through this. And I don't necessarily disagree with that. I'm like, yeah, but this child's too young. The issue is if it's a traumatic death and we make up a story to protect them from it, we can't guarantee that they don't already know the actual story. And there's been so many children that I've worked with who they know the truth, and they keep it secret because they think they have to because mom or dad's keeping it secret. And so everyone's keeping it secret. And what happens is a child ends up, again, with this horrific event that's happened and ends up interpreting that on their own, processing it in their own mind as a 6-year-old, an 8-year-old, a 12-year-old. And quite often, those are a struggle. So something I ask parents from time to time is if you can't guarantee that your kids, number one, will never find out the truth, and if you don't know if they may already know the truth, it's important to be honest with them and give them the truth so that they can process that very difficult thing with you. Sort of like, what's the best case scenario here? We would all agree that the child never has to go through it. But since the child is going through it, the second best is that they go through it with you and not just all alone.
And Andy, if I could add to that, you're exactly right. When we don't tell our kids the truth, we inadvertently kick them out of the inner circle. Yeah. They go from being the inner circle of the family to on the outside looking in. And they know that there are things that they aren't being told. Like you said, kids are keen observers. And think back to when we were younger. If we wanted to know something that was going on in our family, all we had to do is hang out around the corner and listen, right? And grieving parents aren't typically paying attention to their conversations on the phone because they're grieving. So kids can find out just from overhearing you. And if they think they're not being told the truth, they will make sure that they hang out around the corner and listen. They can also find out from their cousins because aunts and uncles typically don't filter what they tell their children. So they just go to their cousin and find out. They also find out from neighbor kids. They can find out on the internet. They can find out from kids at school. Certainly with technology the way it is and the instant ability to communicate via text, think about how the truth or versions of the truth spread around. And thinking about versions of the truth, do you want your kids to have a version of the truth from their cousin? Or a version of the truth they've overheard you talking with somebody where they're only getting part of the story? Or would you want them to have the facts around the events and the death that you know to be true? And by bringing them into the inner circle and talking with them, you actually are honoring it and respecting their need to be included in this very sacred information. And we are talking all ages. Even kids who aren't old enough to fully understand what you're saying still have the conversation. If you have a few children, don't just tell the teens and then not tell the younger kids. Pull all the kids together and tell them as a group. Be honest, realizing that your older kids are going to have more questions, and that's normal. But you don't want your older kids to be secret keepers. So it's important to tell the truth, but tell the truth and be honest with all of your kids in the family. And we recommend doing this as soon as you're able to find the words.
Right.
And go ahead, Andy.
I was going to say, and just to piggyback on that, if you're watching this discussion and you're saying, "Oh my gosh, I did it wrong," and we don't bring this up to judge or to finger point. I have not met a parent that out of some sort of vengeful or hateful reason was trying to protect their child from the truth, right? And typically it's the opposite. It's well intended. And so the case is not to beat ourselves up because we told them something that was untrue. You can start from here, and you can begin that process of bringing in the truth and opening up that relationship. So it's never too late to do that. I just wanted to make that point in here because, yeah.
Well, I was just going to say, and if that is you that Andy's talking about, where you've not been able to share the full truth or any part of the truth, the conversation starter is, I've learned that it's better if you know the truth. And I'm sorry I didn't tell you the truth sooner. I didn't know that would help you. I thought I was protecting you and helping you by keeping some things from you until you were older. But I've since found out that it's better if you know the truth. And when you're telling the truth, keep in mind the age of your kids. We are not saying that you sit your kids down and tell them every last detail of, especially a traumatic loss. You know your kids best. So here's where you'll go with your own instincts around how much to tell them and in what detail to tell them. Pay attention to not only their actual age, but their developmental age. Pay attention to their personality. Pay attention to how much you sincerely think that they can handle at any given time. And really, we recommend telling the truth. Sometimes it's in bite-sized, smaller pieces, right? It's not sitting down and saying the whole truth. You might start the conversation with, there's some things that happened, and I'd like to share a little bit with you now, and know that we'll continue to have conversations about it. So, and that also might help your own comfort level as a parent, that you can just open the door with, I'm here to be honest with you and to tell you the truth, but we might not go into all of it right now.
Yeah. And then they know that, and you're building truth on truth at that point, and you can continue to have that ongoing conversation, because it really is an ongoing conversation. As kids go and they think about it, and they might come back with a question, and you've already opened that conversation to them. Another thing that's important, honesty is certainly important. Another thing is reassurance for children. So many children, when there is a death of someone, particularly mom or a dad or someone close in their family, they may interpret that it was their behavior that caused it. Somehow something they did caused this. Maybe the last interaction they had, they were getting in trouble. Or they thought something inside. When I was a kid, my parents would punish me. I would think inside, all sorts of things. So frustrated and hurt and feeling bad, and how dare they? And sometimes children will make interpretations. So children need reassurance on a number of levels. First of all, that they didn't cause this, and so being honest with them and telling them what happened and what did cause a death helps them to understand that magical thinking of, if I had just been a better child, this particular thing wouldn't have happened. But there's another type of reassurance that they need. Kids will also, when there's a death of a mom or a dad or even a sibling, they now understand that people in their life can die. And when they die, ultimately they come to understand that they don't see that person again. And so they know now that you could die. And so many children will worry about that surviving parent. And so one of the things, and Pamela, you can talk about this for a minute, is, how we reassure our child when they're worried that we could die. I know so often I've heard parents, and what they say is, oh, don't worry about that. I'm going to be around a long time, right? So we make these promises to our kids that we really, really can't keep in that regard.
Exactly. And I think it's parents' natural instinct to reassure kids, I'm not going anywhere. What we know is that we can't guarantee, any one of us can guarantee that we are going to live a long time. And kids know that too, by the way. And so the reassurance is, first of all, here's some things you can say if they're worried about your safety. You can say that you are taking care of yourself. You're getting regular checkups. If you feel sick, you go to the doctor. You're eating a healthy diet and, trying to exercise and do those things. And if you're not doing some of those things, maybe say you'd like to work on it. And that's something you can say to your child, I'd like to work on some of that because I know that's important. That you're driving safely, and talk about all the things that you are doing to keep yourself safe. And then the other thing is have a plan for who will care for the kids, who will raise them. If your spouse has died, let them know if something happened to you and you died, here's who would care for them. And if it's grandparents, make sure that you talk to the grandparents and the grandparents know and agree, or an aunt or uncle or family friend or other family members. You first identify those other people or person who would raise the kids. And then let the kids know, if anything happened to me, Uncle Dave and Aunt Sarah would raise you. And they know that, and they love you. And this is what will happen to you and your brother and sister.
Yeah.
But I don't plan on anything happening to me, and I'm taking care of myself. But this is critical, because one of the things that bereaved parents often don't know is that children will worry about them, their other siblings.
Yep.
Children will even worry about themselves, because all of us who've been bereaved, we understand that feeling of what other shoe is going to drop, what's going to happen next. And as you said, Andy, we no longer think that death just happens to other people. And the other thing that happens with kids is they realize that being a good kid or being a straight A student or any of these things doesn't prevent bad things from happening to them.
Yeah.
That's a whole nother topic around.
Right.
But that feeds into worrying about who else might die.
Yeah, very, very much so. And so we have a few minutes left. I just wanted to hit a couple more points about children and things that are important to know. And these are really things like, if you think, well, what do my kids want me to know? Well, I would say the things we've already talked about, these are things they want you to know that they need, right, in their life. There's a couple of other things. One of them is, because this is so often misunderstood, even in our society, across our society, is that grief is long lasting. It's not something that just, a child is going to forget that relationship. Grief is long lasting, and they will miss the person who died for the rest of their lives quite often. I remember a child who said to me, or actually as an adult, they're in their 60s, and said to me, my mom died when I was 3 years old. And I have realized that my entire life, the memory of her, smell of her, all of those things has been my constant companion throughout my life. Right? That it didn't just go away at some point, but that grief is long lasting, and my love for that person and missing that person really our lifetime becomes important.
And kids don't ever want anyone to forget the person who died. Just like you as a parent don't ever want anyone to forget. And there are things you can do within your family to reassure them that you won't forget and that they won't forget, and you'll continue to remember as a family. And this is where you can, we talked before about meeting your child or your teen where they're at. You might say, I'd really like to do some type of, digital scrapbook, create a website, Facebook page, whatever app the kids are into, maybe even something on TikTok or Instagram, where you're working together to create something that it's really used to remember the person who died. That's really meaningful to kids because they don't want anybody to forget. And, putting together something like that is something you can do together that allows the two of you, or if you're working with all your kids, if you have a few kids, it allows you to share stories and share memories. All of that helps kids to do better when they have those chances with you.
Yeah. So we have run out of time for our discussion today, but we do want to thank you for spending a little time with us on our series, Living with Grief in Uncertain Times, Help and Support for Families. Our next discussion, we're going to talked about how you help yourself, some ideas for helping your child and engaging with your child. Our next topic, we're going to talk about how to help your family, and really looking at, we've talked about how grief impacts those dynamics in the family, but how do you help yourselves as a whole, as a family, as you go through this together? And we know that as you include your children in rituals around the death and in being honest with them, bring them into the family unit, and they feel like they're part of that. So we'll have some discussion in our next video specific to helping your family as a whole. So again, thank you for spending a little bit of time with us, and we'll look forward to our next discussion on this topic.